Great. Thank you, Ashok. And it's great to be here at this IIT alumni event, industry and IIT partnership. And nice to see so many old friends. Today's talk is really about, I'll talk about some of the work done in India on the democratization of our digital economy, focusing on three big ideas that are either implemented or getting implemented. The idea of identity, payments, and data empowerment. And this has been possible between cooperation between IITians, industry, government. So it's a good example of partnership of all the uh, players. So basically, if you look at the challenge in financial inclusion, it's one is how do you give access to a population of 1 billion people? How do you keep them in the system? And how do you empower them with their own data? These are the three big ideas that we talk about. Now, the first problem that we were solving was the access issue. How do you get access? How do you get people into the system? And to give you an idea, India back in 2008, only 17% of Indians had bank accounts. So financial inclusion was pretty rampant. And this was in tune with the global scenario. So, in the global scenario, generally there was a connection between financial inclusion and GDP. So the higher the GDP, the more the financial inclusion. So there was a certain chart, and India was on that curve using global data. But by 2018, India had massively jumped in about 8 or 9 years to be well ahead of the curve in terms of financial inclusion. And by traditional methods, it would have taken 46 years to reach where we reached in about 8 years. So this is an example of how technology can accelerate something at scale. So what would have normally taken 46 years got done in about 8 years. And the reason this is something happening here. Yeah, should be okay. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so this acceleration that happened was three things. One was the political will, of course, to get this done. By the way, this presentation is available for everyone, so you can just Ashok can distribute it if you want it. You don't have to take pictures. Second is a proactive central bank, and third, very important and strategic, is a set of technologies developed in India called as the India Stack. So the India Stack basically has three parts to it. One is the identity layer, which is giving every resident a unique ID, enabling them to prove who I am. I am who I claim to be. And that provided the ID itself, which is the Aadhaar, which you well know, but also eKYC, or electronic know your customer. In other words, you could use this to do a know your customer where you had a government issued photo ID, address, date of birth, and so on. And by working with all the regulators, the eKYC was applicable to banking, telecommunications, insurance, pensions, mutual funds, and so on. And you could use an eKYC to instantly get that product. So you could get a bank account in 2 minutes. You can get a mobile connection in 2 minutes. That's very important for inclusion. And then we also provide something called e-signature, which allowed you to do a digital signature using your ID. And then there's a whole payment layer, which was both, again, called UPI and so on, as well as a payment layer for DBT, as well as the ability for people to withdraw money in a village called the Aadhaar-enabled payment service. And the third important layer is what we call as data empowerment. How do we use data for empowering people? So these three big ideas, identity, payments, and data, was something that was rolled out over 10 years. So this is actually gives you a time frame of this whole project, which is not really one project, a set of projects which started in 2009, and now by 2020, over 10 years, they have been rolled out. And I think this is an important message that when you look at national population scale interventions, you cannot expect them to happen in a day. They will take time. At the same time, you need to have a strategic way of thinking about it. You must have to have a way of layering it so that you can roll out one on top of the other, so that over time you have a complete architecture for that. So identity, then payments, all of them happened over time, and it happened across agencies. So Aadhaar was done by the UIDAI, UPI was done by the NPCI, and uh, data layer is being essentially driven by RBI. So different agencies have all come together to create this end game, and also, of course, it spanned different governments. So the first was identity, and when we started, only 1 in 25 had a unique identity in 2008. And we deliberately kept this, as you know, very simple. 4 data points: name, address, date of birth, sex, biometric identification, a 12-digit number. And what's important is, why did we do biometric identification? Because there was no easy way of establishing uniqueness. Because if in a country where most people didn't have a birth certificate, it's very difficult to prove that a person, he can claim multiple numbers. The only way was to do a biometric deduplication. And our biometric deduplication was a massively parallel computing exercise. So let's say we had 1 million people enrolling in a day, and we had 500 million people in a database. We had to do 500 trillion matches, pattern recognition matches, to establish uniqueness. So it was a very intensive project, required massive computing, and UIDAI runs in 2 data centers, one in Delhi, one in Bangalore, thousands of servers all doing parallel processing. And that's how we did the deduplication. And this was also done quite rapidly. So we had 100 million people by 2011, about 930 million people by 2015, and today it's about 1.25 billion people on the platform. And it also does massive amounts of KYC and authentication. Authentication is just doing an online verification that you are who you claim to be, and KYC is used to open a bank account or to get a mobile connection. So all this runs into billions of transactions. It's also important to realize that this was also used to link to the banking system. The first use in the banking system was to open the account. So eKYC was to open the account. But second was to create a direct benefit transfer mechanism. So if you link the ID to the bank account, you could directly transfer money in real time to the bank account. And so far, government has transferred about $32 billion into bank accounts, and there are about 647 million people whose bank accounts are linked to the ID. This is the world's largest cash transfer program, and it happens pretty much in real time. So you press a button, and within 24 hours, there's a straight-through processing into your bank account, no fraud, all that stuff. So if you look at today, whether you look at LPG subsidy or Narega payments or pension payments or scholarships, increasingly it is going through this. And tomorrow the same principle will be applied to electricity subsidies, water subsidies, and so on. So over time, the idea being that you need to get the subsidy out of the product and make it a financial transaction so that the product itself is sold at market price, and therefore you remove the implicit subsidies in the economy. And for example, electricity is a good example, where if we can make sure that the people who deserve to get free power get the money into the account to buy, but everybody buys power from the meter, then you can change the whole business of electricity distribution. So this has huge implications on the economy and how you use it. And it's been used for LPG, kerosene, now fertilizer, and so on. So this has been a big part of this whole thing. It's also helped in reducing the gap on marginalized groups. So more women have got it, poor have got it, people with no education have got it. So it's really also about inclusion and making sure that we address the gaps that are there in all these categories. And recently a survey was done called the State of the Aadhaar Report. This was done by Dalberg Consulting, funded by Omidyar. And they came out did a survey of 167,000 people, and 92% were satisfied, which is quite a high, very good record. And very important that for 8% of the adults, this was the first ever ID in their life. So before this, they had no ID. And it was the first ID for 15% of the homeless, and first ID for 14% of transgender. So it's really had a big impact across the board. Now that was about ID, but the next big thing which happened was what happened in payments. And this is again a very important thing. Now, some of the payments had already happened in Aadhaar with the DBT and all that. But sometime in 2013 or so, NPCI, which is the National Payment Corporation of India, which is a non-profit company set up by the banks, was looking at what the future of payments is going to be. And I was also the advisor to them. And we realized that we had to have a whole new way of doing payments, which was mobile first, any bank to any bank, any mobile phone to any mobile phone, real-time instant transfer at low cost and at scale. That was the broad remit of what we are trying to do. And this is essentially how it works. Basically, money is transferred between bank accounts in real time, but you can access those bank accounts through any external app. So if you'll see the architecture of this, you can use Google Pay or Phone Pay or Paytm or WhatsApp Pay or whatever. So multiple apps are provided through which you can make the transaction. This was a deliberate architecture to separate the payment transaction from the consumer experience and allow anyone to come through any app that he wanted. And it can be used for person to person, person to business, online merchant, offline merchant. All possible operations are possible here. And this system was launched in 2016 May, and by 2016 October, it was doing 100,000 transactions. And then demonetization happened in November of 2016. Today, that system does 1.3 billion transactions a month. And it's a very, very advanced payment system. The BIS, which is the Bank of International Settlements, has seen this as a model for the world. Recently, Google wrote to the Fed, US Fed, saying that the US Fed is planning a real-time system called FedNow in 2024. And they suggested that that should be modeled along UPI lines. So this has now become a sort of a benchmark for payments, fundamentally because unlike, like say in China, where you have a duopoly, you have two large companies own the payment market, WeChat and Alipay. India has a very, very competitive payment market where all banks can compete and all front-end applications can compete. So we have huge competition there, and that makes it better for people because they get choice, low cost, efficiency. And just yesterday, the NPCI is now allowed. WhatsApp was allowed in at 1 million limit, 1 million customers. Yes, yesterday they've been, because they've met certain conditions, they've been allowed to go to 10 million customers. But ultimately, WhatsApp has 400 million customers. So when all that happens, you're going to see a huge increase in transactions. And this system is doing, as I said, 1.3 billion transactions in a month. But the goal is to get it to 1 billion transactions a day. And it's any bank to any bank. So you can have a Citibank account, SBI account. All that is completely real-time transactions. I talked about WhatsApp, which is now been allowed up to 10 million customers. And you can see the impact of that on digital payments. In 2017-18, UPI was 4% of digital payments. By 18-19, it's already at 17%. So it's adding, its share of market is going up because it's so much more convenient. And the number of UPI transactions has overtaken credit and debit card transactions within 3 years of launch. That shows how new technology can get there. Now that is the payment history. The third big thing which is happening, which again India is unique, is what's called as data empowerment. And the idea here is that, we know that data is now a fact of life. We know that more and more data is going to be generated. We have seen the impact of smartphones on data. Tomorrow you'll have IoT devices. So there'll be literally a huge tsunami of data which is coming. And we know that companies know how to use that data to, run profitable companies. So you've seen Google, Facebook, Amazon. They all use data very effectively to generate money from advertising or e-commerce. And we have seen that governments also use data. We have seen, in China, for example, how governments use data. So the concept of data as something which is used by companies and governments is understood. But if we are going to have this huge onslaught of data, can we think of data as something which benefits individuals, either individuals or small businesses? And that's the idea of data empowerment. And what we have done in India is a unique architecture that allows people to take advantage of their own data. Now, this is a very profound idea. It's not there anywhere else in the world. It's important to realize that this is an Indian innovation. And we have done that, and this has been done by a group of, again, government and private sector and regulators by creating a new architecture of institutions called account aggregators. And I'll explain what that means. So the way it works is, an account aggregator is sort of it's a company or something which is regulated. So in India, this is regulated by the Reserve Bank of India, and it is meant only for financial data. And I am a user, and I have my data somewhere in some system. It can be in my bank, or in a mutual fund, or in my tax platform. These are all places where my data is. And we call these as financial information providers. And this side, we have different kinds of applications that can use this data to give me services. I can, for example, get credit from a bank, or get a wealth management application, or I can get a robo-advisor who uses AI to advise what I should buy, and so on. So these are various applications. So the way it works is that if, for example, if I want something, I ask my account aggregator to get that data from wherever it is. I can specify that and send that encrypted to wherever I want it to go. So this is the architecture of account aggregation. So there are three things here. One is, this means the data is in the hands of the user. The user can use this data for whatever purpose he or she wants. And this is currently available across the financial sector. So it's approved and regulated by Reserve Bank for banking, SEBI for mutual funds, IRDA for insurance, PFRDA for pensions, and so on. Second thing is that the account aggregator works on your behalf. So the problem we have had in this data business is, when the company collects data, then they use it to sell to you or whatever. Here, the account aggregator cannot use the data by regulation. So when you get the license to operate this, you cannot use this data. So they can't use the data. Secondly, the data which comes from these sources is encrypted and goes to where it goes. So the guy in between can't even see the data. So that means instead of, he doesn't make money from your data. So therefore, his incentive is aligned with yours, and he passes it to wherever it is. The third thing is, this requires a legal or regulatory framework which says that a person is entitled to get his or her own data back. Now, ultimately, that will come in the data privacy law, which is currently being placed in Parliament. But in the meantime, in a regulated market, the regulator can insist that the consumer should get his data. So the financial regulator can insist that the consumer should get his financial data. So that is what is happening here. So you really require many things. You need the account aggregator framework, you need a legal system, and very importantly, you need the technology which allows every individual and every business to get data in real time from any source and give it to any destination. And we have all these three pieces in place right now. So AAs, as I said, cannot read data, they cannot consume data, they only can transfer data from one to other. And this is already getting rolled out. Many banks, NBFCs are all coming on board. And also, how that data is used is also decided by the owner of the consumer, or the guy who owns the data. And he can say that this data, for example, if I give it to a lender, I can put stipulations on how he or she will use my data. So you have complete control over the consent of how your data, you can say I can use it only once, or you can keep it for 1 week, or whatever. You can put all kinds of sort of constraints on your data. Now, a good example of this is, let's say that we have a small business owner and who wants to raise some money, and historically she would never have got money because she has no way of getting a loan from the bank. But now she has her tax returns and the GST statements and bank statements, all digital, which she can get from her respective databases. give it to the lender. The lender looks at the data, applies AI and all that, and decides that he or she is worthy of the loan, gives the loan, and use the loan to grow your business. So this is how it will work, and this is called as flow-based lending. And this is getting launched right now, and in the next 1 year, you'll see, thousands of crores of loans happening through this mechanism. And this is fundamentally radically different from how lending has happened in the past. Lending in the past historically has been asset-based. You show your assets. Here, this is based on your business performance. And that's why it's called flow-based lending. And all this also allows you to have early warning systems both at the individual lender level, at the bank level, on what is possibly, if some risks are going bad and so on. So the whole new architecture that is evolving, which is fundamentally different from the old way of doing things. And most importantly, this is empowering consumers. I think we have to understand that nowhere in the world, any country has built a system where data is empowering consumers. Most countries have systems where companies are benefiting from data, or the country's government is benefiting from data. This is the only place where we have an architecture which can be used to empower consumers. So these are the three things. Now, also this whole method of data is not just for the financial services alone. It can apply to any, for example, the same principle can be applied to healthcare. Your healthcare records are available to you and to take it somewhere else. Or your skill records can be taken when you apply for a job. So this architecture is, the financial system is just the first instantiation of this architecture. The architecture is abstracted to be across any industry. So this again makes it very, very powerful. So I think I talked about how this has evolved over the last 10 years. And this has created a whole flywheel because, today, billions of people we have, 330 million people open bank accounts in the last 6 years. And then they're getting DBT money, they're able to pay things, empowerment. Empowerment means that they can now get credit using the digital footprint. So now they have an interest in being in the formal economy. The whole thing creates a flywheel of activity. And the important thing is that the reason this was able to do that is because of thinking of them as platforms and not pipes. So just like the internet is a platform, which internet has all TCP/IP protocols and all that, and on that, whether it's a Google or a government service or Amazon or edX, they all work on top of internet. That's the power of the internet. Similarly, think of all these India stack, identity, payments, and data, as a platform on which you can do financial inclusion, health insurance, faster payments, skilling. So it's really creating a platform thinking to these kind of problems. And the other important thing is, how do you create a combination of innovation and regulation? And this is basically the funda being that if you use this technology, you can have regulated players like banks and NBFCs who work with unregulated players like Google and Facebook, but they both do their part of the job so that overall you get the benefit for the customer. And this is very different because if you look at what traditionally we had a closed system, but the innovation was very slow. It took years and years to get things done. Or you have something like Facebook saying we'll launch our own currency, so they're also on their own thing. But we have to find the best of both worlds. How do we combine the best of regulated systems with the best of these new big tech platforms? And India has done that, which is why around the world people are looking at this as a role model. And therefore you're able to sort of bridge this regulation and innovation, privacy and personalization, ease of use versus fraud prevention. And a lot of this has been possible because of volunteers from a think tank called iSpirit. Again, many of them are IITians, and they have worked very hard without getting, on a volunteer basis to make a lot of this possible. And the belief that technology can be used to really leapfrog in India. So I think this is an approach which is very, very powerful, which we have done last 10 years. Now, let me briefly talk about today's topic of industry and IIT. First of all, this whole infrastructure which has been created, many IITians have contributed to that. So it's you could not have done this without a lot of IITians. I mean, I'm from IIT Bombay. The first CEO of this, the current chairman of TRAI, Ram Sevak Sharma, is from IIT Kanpur, the most recent CEO of UID, Ajay Bhushan Pandey, is also from IIT Kanpur. Vivek Raghavan, who is here, who's really the pillar of Aadhaar. And Vivek, do you stand up, man? So Vivek is a great example of, Vivek, IIT Delhi, BTech, PhD in robotics from CMU, did startups in the Valley, came back, and last 10 years, he's been working on public systems. Now he's applying this to AI in public systems. So he's from IIT Delhi. So really, a lot of IITians are part of this journey. Similarly, a lot of IIT professors are a part of this journey. Many of these things, we've had committees with people like Dr. Phatak and others who all contributed to this. So there's been a lot of IITians, graduates and IIT professors. Of course, industry is very much a part of this journey. I mean, for example, if you look at the biometric technology, India has completely changed the economics of biometric technology by dramatically lowering costs, by standardizing APIs and driving competition and so on. Today, what Vivek has done using AI, for example, is face recognition, face authentication in UID now is very possible. So I can just take a picture of somebody and do an authentication. So all that is possible, and again, using all these tools, and people have contributed. Now the IITs themselves are not a formal part of all this building, but I think they can be, because what we're creating is an ecosystem, and therefore I think there are huge opportunities here for adding products, for doing research. For example, this whole data empowerment is a whole new ball game, which has massive potential, and I think there's massive role for research and technology. And then, of course, I think there's a whole AI piece to this. If you look at what Vivek is doing, apart from using AI in authentication of face to improve accuracy, he's used AI in authentication of fingerprints to eliminate fraud fingerprints. He's now applying AI to the GST system and other systems to catch fraud in lending. And then finally applying AI and neural machine translation to doing Indian language translation. So he has built open source solutions for translation of 9 Indian languages to English back and forth. So, this is all free stuff anybody can use. So this is all, I think we have massive potential to take this forward, and I think the IITs can be very much part of this. So with this, I'll come to the end and happy to take questions on anything. Can you have a mic or something? Yeah.
Hello. Hi, Nandan. This is Venkat here, 1996 IIT Madras. In your data empowerment stack, right, I have a basic question. So, actually, who owns the data? Does the individual own the data? Or, for example, right, if I were to apply for a job, say in the US, and I use this AA intermediary to transfer my information over there. So again, where is the regulation coming in once the data goes outside India?
Yeah, so first of all, who owns the data? Obviously, you own the data and you're entitled to it. But some of this data is co-created. Like if I have a bank account, the data in the bank is also in some sense the bank's data. But what happens is that if I'm applying for a job, right? So I ask, I have an online request to IIT, say, get me my transcript. So you get a real-time transcripts of the last 5 years you spent in IIT with grades encrypted and sent to you. And you can then request somebody else where you did some work to give your work experience certificate and so on. Now that whole packet, you then give it to your potential new employer. But you can then put constraints on that. You can say, you can use this data only for the purpose of ascertaining whether I'm eligible for a job. You have no other purpose. Or you can put a constraint saying, you have to destroy this data within 1 week. So the constraint is put on the, you can put, when you give the data to somebody, you can also stipulate how they use it. So it's your data, but if it's, it's also in some sense co-created data, right? Because if the It's also the data of, say, IIT, or also the data, but it's co-created. But when you take your data and give it to somebody, you can say exactly how they use it. So there's a consent architecture. You can look at the XML and all that, how we put consent. The only place in the world where we have a consent architecture which actually can stipulate how you can use your data. Yeah. How are you, Suresh? No jet lag or?
Well, I am getting jet lagged. But thanks to the interesting discussions that we are having, I'm staying awake. So my question is that one of the major concerns globally, and particularly in the United States, is cybersecurity. And interestingly, in your stack, I don't see any issues related to cybersecurity and hacks. Countries like China and other rogue countries, mostly, are very active in. I'm just saying China in general. It's been a topic of discussion.
You're from Washington, so that's what you'll say.
And greetings from Trump. So, question is, where is the security issue in this whole diagram that you put up, and is that a concern or not a concern?
No, absolutely. I mean, when you have such a sophisticated system, you have to think of security. And I didn't go into that because, you can't do these things without building highly secure systems. And actually, Vivek is here. Vivek did the cybersecurity architecture for this, and he'll be happy offline to share with you all the steps that we have taken in terms of limiting access, encryption, whatever, to make this very, very secure. And there's a whole system because for obviously with something like this, there'll be attempts to get in. So, you have to guard against that. So all that Vivek has done actually. Vivek has been one of the key players along with the cybersecurity people at UIDAI. He's still a consultant to UIDAI, honorary consultant, doesn't get paid.
Hello, Nandan. My name is Fareed Khan and I'm not an IIT. I haven't gate crashed, but I'm here. I have a question for you. When you say that you own the data, but it's also co-owned, especially in cross-border transactions, what is the regulatory mechanism for that data to be, or for the consent that's given, for example?
See,
ensure.
Ultimately, the individual is giving the consent to send it across the border, right? So to that extent, it's not being sent without your consent. You are saying, let's say that you want to apply for a job abroad from India. So you get your degree, college degree certificate from IIT, and you give it to an employer in Manila. It's a cross-border data movement, but you're doing it fully knowing that your data is going across. The important thing here is that data is not being sent without your permission.
But who ensures that my permission, sorry to press the point, who ensures that the criteria, for example, that I set for my permission is followed through, especially in a cross-border?
No, I agree. I mean, obviously, you're talking about the enforceability of that. Now, in the case of a regulated system like this, where most of the players are regulated or have permission by the regulator, then if they violate this, then they will lose their access. In the cross-border, it may be slightly more difficult because he's not under your regulation.
Thank you.
So, just as a follow-up, if you recall,
How come you get two questions here, Suresh?
you may recall that there is an issue related to data privacy when it comes to student records, and I'm bringing this up because this is a primarily IIT, event, and there are a lot of the IIT directors here. What are the IITs doing to preserve the security of student data, transcripts, etc., and how is that related to the security issue to private data anywhere?
You ask all the directors who are sitting. I have no clue. Anyone wants to take that question? Yeah, Kanakya.
This is Hemant from IIT Bombay. Don't take this as a criticism of Aadhaar.
Never, Hemant.
But in a way, an Aadhaar is also indicating a failure of an IIT and industry collaboration. As an example, China took a different approach and they developed a face recognition algorithm indigenously, as well as they developed a fingerprint algorithm indigenously. Same thing for retina. In our, and rightly so, I would say, but in our system, we favored the speed of spreading it out, and consequently, there wasn't actual authentication algorithm research done inside the country. You have any comments on how
Yeah.
that could change?
No, in fact, I think it's a slightly different approach, which is, you obviously have to get this to work very quickly. And to do that, in the beginning, we had to get the biometric deduplication engines from outside. So the UID was designed, we designed a multi-engine capability. One engine was from NEC, one was from Morpho, and so on. But what is happening now, and again, Vivek can give you more ideas, is that now Vivek is working with some, I think with Triple ID, right? Triple ID Hyderabad, not IIT, Triple ID. And they are building an open source engine using AI deep learning to do biometric deduplication. So now that we have the system going, we can now build an open source AI based engine, and then we can, the whole thing now becomes independent. Similarly, on face authentication, not face recognition, face authentication, they have built all the now AI based things to, so technically anyone wants to authenticate himself to UID just has to take a picture and authenticate. It does liveness testing and all that. So I think in some sense you build it using products out there, but over time you can replace those products with open source implementations.
Ashok Misra, IIT Kanpur alumnus.
And IIT Delhi and IIT Bombay, all that.
All right. So two things. One is a comment, well, maybe a question. Several of the things that you outlined, and you said this is the biggest in the world, the first time in the world, and all that. Why is it not publicly announced that, look, this is the best system in the world? I mean, if you ask a common man on the road, they will not know that we are the
Sure.
best in the world. So, because every time, we hear that we are behind, now we are ahead. Why is it not come on and not being more close?
Well, I mean, I don't know. But I think, that's okay. I mean, I don't think we should get too
No,
hung
I'm
up
not saying for you, for the country.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I think the recognition is now happening. I mean, for example, on identity, we are now 20 countries in the world who are looking at replicating India's model. 20 countries. On payments, we have at least 5 or 6 countries who are looking at it. And as I said, Google wrote to the US government saying, you need to do like India. Now, that's quite a, so what I'm saying is that its recognition is happening. On data empowerment, it's frankly too new. People don't even know what this means. So it's happening. I mean,
no, I know it's happening, but it should be the front headlines,
it
That's what I'm saying.
doesn't matter. I mean, you're getting 500 WhatsApp messages, 501 message saying we are the greatest. Who's going to bother here?
No, but headlines of the Times of India or something like
वो
that.
भी कौन पढ़ता है यार?
But the second question, the main thing,
हाँ.
this is all great. From your perspective, what are the challenges that you could give to the IITs and the industry? For
No,
taking
I
it
think,
to the next level?
First of all, I think what this demonstrates is that we can do these globally, technically state-of-the-art leapfrogs in India. It's not that difficult. It's been done by Indian talent, many of them from IITs. And therefore, it just required cooperation between individuals, government, business, industry. And therefore, if we all put our minds together and execute well, we can fix things. And that's the message from all this. We should do this in every field.
Hi Nandan, good evening. This is Neelam from IIT Delhi. Sir, just to tell you that we definitely boast about Aadhaar and UPI in front of our IIT friends even when they arrive from US. So it's definitely a fabulous thing. My question was that are we now integrating and utilizing this tremendous power of Aadhaar plus this account aggregation for the next census? like, because we can have the most fabulous sensors, including DigiLocker and uploading all these things and all.
Yeah.
And I know that because of the recent events, it may become a bit,
Yeah.
an issue of debate. But I think it would be a great opportunity to utilize this entire thing to get the whole company, to get the whole country up to
Sure.
date.
I mean, you
on
know what's
records.
happening, so I don't want to get into that. But I think census, frankly, is not about individuals. Census is a total. So census is not at the individual level, right? It's about total. So it may not be required. But I think, I mean, today, for example, I know they realize that all the driver's licenses are in the DigiLocker. It's amazing. That means, the driver license system has uploaded driver's license. You can download your driver's license on your phone. And when you're stopped by a cop, you can just show your driver's license on the phone. Many people are doing that. So this is all happening as we speak. These rollouts are happening and millions of people are benefiting. I mean, if you take a simple thing like Aadhaar-enabled payment, which allows somebody to withdraw money from a bank account doing a biometric authentication, 120 million Indians are doing it today. In some village, they're going somewhere, merchant, putting finger, getting money. So stuff is happening on the ground. So I think it'll keep happening.
Nandan, I have a question here. Monish Sanyal, IIT Madras.
Yes, boss.
Monish Sanyal from IIT Madras. I'm really responding to what Professor Mishra was asking, why we are not promoting this. Let's not forget the 60 Minutes program that was played out in 2003 that made IIT a famous name all across the US. Right at the moment, a group of volunteers and I started IIT startups in Silicon Valley. Get the statistics. We are the 4th largest unicorn builders in the world. Stanford, Harvard, Berkeley, IIT, and MIT after us. So we are now driving that all over the place. We've got 200 startups in our stable. But the point is, the brand drive depends on us. And we really need to pump up how good we Indians are, more so how good we IITians are. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Uday.
Yeah, no, my question, I'll bring it back to the technical aspects. See, you had 3 pillars, identity,
Payments.
and then data. Fundamentally, it's bits and bytes,
Yeah.
right? Except that some bits are interpreted as money, while some bits are interpreted as a medical certificate.
Yeah.
So, won't the architecture be essentially very similar?
No.
Why?
No, I mean, obviously, wherever the abstractions are the same, we use the same abstractions. But that way, everything is bits and bytes. So then everything is the same.
In a sense, yes. And see, the security that I use to do my financial transaction, the same security layers could be utilized for doing my...
That's exactly what I said. The account aggregator framework is agnostic of which sector you use it in. We chose the financial sector because that's the most mature user of this approach. But exactly the same approach can be put in healthcare, skills, academic records. That's the power of the idea. So, absolutely. All these things are at an abstracted level.
I'm S.S. Murthy. I'm IIT Delhi, IIT Bombay. Most of us are terribly disturbed about many disturbances that are taking place in our country today. Name CEA, NPR. We are totally confused why this is happening.
I'm also confused.
Yes. And now, all this Aadhaar, so much of data is there available on the individuals and citizens of this country. And still our political class don't seem to believe that. And more and more confusion is being created about anything that can be done on the parameters or the identification of our people, including, and I thought that most of the Aadhaar members are of Indian citizens, okay? And then with all this data, science and technology available, why is there so much confusion? Can we not solve the problem and get out of this disturbance?
I mean, I would be also happy if we can do that, but think of this. See, Aadhaar is not a citizenship system. Aadhaar only says Ashok is Ashok, or John is John, or Muhammad is Muhammad, or whatever. So it's really an ID system that can be used for online verification. We stayed out of this whole debate of citizenship because that gets into a different, because in a country where documentation of people is, they don't have birth certificates. It's a very complex exercise. So Aadhaar is just a digital ID system which verifies that you are who you claim to be. And also it's designed in a way that the data cannot be shared. If you look at the architecture as well as the law, as well as the Supreme Court judgments, they're all designed to prevent the sharing of the data because of the concern that we should make sure that this is, privacy is secured. Now, why all this is happening, maybe if you start debating, you'll not go home. So I don't want to go into that.
Hi, Nandan. Since nobody has asked a question from IIT Kharagpur, I am from Kharagpur.
All right. Way to go, man. Hey, not enough guys from Kharagpur in Bangalore, I think.
So, Pradeep Datta. Question is, I haven't heard you refer to maybe the elephant in the room, which is cryptocurrency. And I know many sovereign countries are coming up with their own cryptos, and the ones that are in circulation right now are sometimes being looked very negatively upon. Any comments on that, and how does your system work on that?
No, first of all, I think the original crypto was designed to be outside the system. If you look at the original crypto guys, they wanted to create a completely anonymized currency which was self-regulating. And in fact, outside the state, right? And if you look at the use of the cryptos also, it's for all kinds of, a lot of it is for nefarious activities. But those cryptos never became such a big issue to worry the system. What happened was then the Libra thing. Because when Facebook came into the business and said, we will build a crypto kind of currency called Libra, which will be what is called a stable coin. That is, it's a currency that is a basket of currencies, and we'll do cross-border instant transactions. Then everybody said, oh my God, if Facebook with 2 billion users, 2.4 billion users launches a cryptocurrency, then it essentially makes the entire system. And that's when the central banks woke up and said, let's do something about this. So it was a wake-up call for central banks that unless they offer payments in a very easy way and very cheap way, then they're likely to get disintermediated by Libra kind of situations. And that's when central banks are looking at what's called as central bank digital currency, CBDC. So for example, China is launching a digital currency, Sweden is launching. So they are launching it because they want to be in charge of the currency business. So I think what is now coming out is that the reason why the Indian model now is looked at so favorably is that it gives all the benefits promised by at least the Libra kind. It gives you instant transactions. It gives you financial inclusion. It gives you low cost. And if two countries decide to use these mechanisms, it gives you instant remittances, which is what Libra gives. So the reason why the world's bankers are looking at this saying, now we have a way of thinking about solving the problem without creating a whole new currency, which is what Libra does. So I think that's where we are on cryptos. So you have the classical cryptos like Bitcoin, you have the stable coins like Libra, you have the central bank DCs, and then using fiat currency, you have approaches like this. Now, our approach does not prohibit you from using a cryptocurrency in the architecture. So in the UPI architecture, the stored value can be a fiat currency like the rupee, or it could be a cryptocurrency. So the architecture is agnostic to the stored value.
This question is about the data part. I see a parallel with the APMCs of the past. APMCs, where the commission agent was not expected to actually take part in the transaction or become a buyer. Now, what regulation is there to stop AA becoming one of the interested parties?
AA, first of all, is a licensed, at least today in the financial system, AA is a licensed regulated entity. AA gets his right to operate from the central bank. So the Reserve Bank issues a license to be an AA, just like the Reserve Bank issues a license to be a bank. However, in the way it's designed in India is that RBI is doing it on behalf of all the financial regulators. So if somebody gets an AA status, all the 5 financial regulators can use that. So part of it is regulated. Second is the terms of the license are that you cannot exploit that data.
But similar terms were there even for commission agent, that he was not supposed to be one of the buyers. He was just a link between a farmer
Yeah,
and a buyer.
but anyway, no, but he commission agent in some mandi is one thing. This if here
I understand.
if
Being
the other guy
digital, the
messes up, he
regulation is
loses
much
license
clear,
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is that technologically he cannot see the data. So what happens is that if I ask for my GST returns from my GST system, it comes encrypted and digitally signed from GST, and it is passed by this AA to say my bank for a loan. So when it passes and it doesn't sit in the AA, it acts as a pass through. When it passes through, it's fully encrypted, so they can't even read that data even if they wish to. So it's both technologically as well as legally prohibited from what you said. Of course, somebody may still tell-
What if they kind of collude with one of the consumers of data?
Okay, first of all, when the consumer of data
Because in case of commission agent also, he was becoming a buyer.
No, consumer of data could be also has stipulations on how we can use the data. The consent architecture can say that you cannot share it with somebody else. Now, obviously, if guys start violating this, then we have to have an enforcement mechanism. But it's much more digital, so I think enforcement also will be much easier than in a commission agent situation.
Hello, sir.
Wrap up.
Myself is Dheeraj. I'm from IIT Dharwad, Hubli Dharwad.
Very good. I'm from Dharwad.
Yeah. So the question is regarding we are collecting so much of our data and
Who's
then
we?
processing as a entity.
Who's we?
Means any application we are
Any
collecting the data, and then we have a lot of data available. As you have briefly mentioned that this data has to be quickly processed by using parallel computing, and currently if you see the high performance computing of the current status of India, HPC status, we are not in the top, you could say top 500 probably, don't have any HPC there. So how do you see the usage or the implementation of, currently we are coming to the supercomputing mission with petaflop machines, but do you think that we are lagging on the computing part? Or
Okay, I don't know about all this HPC and all that. I can tell you that we built a system which does 500 trillion matches a night using an array of several thousand Intel commodity hardware running on open source. So that's, to us, we can build anything with that.